Hello and welcome to another episode of the Homebrew Pub, the only pub in existence where every beer on tap is made by a homebrewer. And on this ethereal plane, the Homebrew Pub will turn into the guest brewer's perfect brew pub. So please come in, grab a stool, and grab a pint. This week we welcome to the pub a friend of mine. It is, well, I know him on Twitter as Rob from the Internet. He has a fantastic show called Rob, in parentheses, from the Internet, Talks Beer. Hello, Rob from the Internet.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Man, I am living the best possible life I can during a global pandemic.
You know, I think that's what we're all doing right now, which is why I created this very special homebrew pub that exists outside of the realm of reality that we don't have to worry about the pandemic. Would love for everyone to hear about your show, because, I mean, I watch it all the time.
Sure. So I do a show. It's on YouTube. The YouTube channel is, Rob, in parentheses, from the Internet, talks about beer. And that's literally what the show is. So, each week I have a different guest. We talk about a style of beer. We talk about the beer's history. We talk about its flavor profile. And we talk about whatever else comes to mind while we're having our discussion about beer history, flavor profiles, and things like that. It's I keep it light, I keep it organic. The premise is just to try and help people who might be a little trepidatious of stepping outside of their comfort zone of the big macro beers, and maybe convince them to try something different. And it's nice. My show, I have some industry professionals, I have other home brewers, I have people who like beer, I even have people who like non-alcoholic beer on my show. I mean, so a little bit of everything for anybody who's willing to take a chance and watch or /listen.
Because I know when myself and my friend came on, we were drinking Chimay Blue, and I don't think we quite appreciated how strong that beer was. And I know by the end of it, we were really goofy because I don't think we had eaten, and I think we had had a beer or two beforehand as well to loosen up. And then you're telling us again, this is my second recording with a big Chimay beer, and we're like, how are you still standing? Because we are just talking gibberish right now.
Thank you, craft beer, for making my alcoholism seem like a fun hobby.
So who are some of the other guests our homebrewing audience may have heard of?
Let's see. Who else have I had on? Most of the people I've had on have been from Canada, obviously, because that's where I'm living these days. But I had Mike Doble, the owner of Explorium Brew Pub in Milwaukee. He owns two breweries and brew pubs in the Milwaukee area. I had Sam Corbet, who's the head brewer for Sawdust City in Gravenhurst, Ontario. Who else have I had? I've had Ruveni Da Silva on my show just recently. She's the latest episode. She's a writer. She does a lot of stuff for Good Beer Hunting and things like that. She was absolutely fantastic. But for the most part, most people that have been on my show have been just other beer enthusiasts. So home brewers, people who work in the beer industry. The next episode is actually a repeat guest. His name is Nick King. He works at one of the local breweries. Well, local-ish. I mean, it's within an hour of me. Breweries. He works there as a server and all-around cleanup kind of guy.
Nice.
So yeah, it's not an exclusive club. Anybody who wants to come on can be on my show. I'm more than willing to talk to anybody about anything, really. If you like beer, cool, let's talk. If you don't like beer, cool, let's talk about that. Yeah.
No, and it's such a great time to come on and just shoot the breeze with you. So if people want to come on, what's the best way to reach out to you and be like, hey, I want to come on and talk beer, or not talk beer, as the case may be?
Right. So you can reach me on Twitter. That's my main social outlet. That's Rob from Internet is my handle there. Otherwise, you can email me at robtalksbeer@rowald.net. We can put the actual address in your show notes or whatever, so people don't have to try and figure out how to spell my last name. But yeah. like the easiest though is just to reach out to me on Twitter. I accept DMs from just about anybody on Earth. I just might take me a day or two to notice that I have a message request, but I will get to them all. I am drinking Eye to Eye from Flux Brewing. It's in Scotland, Ontario, which is a tiny little burg, not burb, burg, of about I think 4,200 people.
Nice.
It's literally this brewery is literally 5 minutes down the road from me. I can go there on my lunch hour, have a couple beers, come back because I work from home, and it's all good. But this is their Irish red. It's nice. It's let's see, what do they say? It's 25 IBUs, so IBUs are very subjective. 4.5% alcohol, and ingredients include water, barley, hops, and yeast. Hey, go
The
figure.
the classic. I'm drinking, so it's become my house beer, but I brewed this in honor of Shakespeare. It's an English mild, and it's about 4%, and it means I can have 4 or 5 of them in an evening and not feel terrible. So, cheers.
Nice. Yeah. Cheers. I'm still pouring mine.
So, you yourself are obviously a home brewer, which is why you are our guest visiting home brewer here at the Homebrew Pub. So, what is your when you're making a beer? What is your approach to brewing and thinking about recipes and all of that fun stuff?
Yeah, so when I think about a beer style that I want to make, the first thing I do is I go and I look at the BJCP or whatever it is, the beer judges guide.
Certification program, yeah.
Yeah. So they had, and I use that as a jumping off point. They're like, okay, it uses this, this, and this. I'm like, cool. Now I'm going to replace this with this and this with this because I like the concept of all the actual standards there are, but I like to play around.
Hmm.
So the recipe that I sent to you today is a twist on a blonde ale. I call it the Canadian Dirty Blonde because I swap out a little bit of the base malt for a different variety to give it a little darker color and a little bit more flavor than you would typically get from a blonde style ale. So, yeah, I like to be fairly loose with my recipe creation. I'm not afraid to try things. I make some good beers. I make some okay beers. I've made a few. No, not gonna do that ever again type of beers. But I have a friend who's also a home brewer who's out in Nova Scotia. Who we are pretty much diametrically opposed when it comes to our style of brewing. He's very much follows the style guidelines to the letter and tries to replicate beer styles perfectly. Where I'm like, yeah, I'm going to take this and I'm going to pull this hop out. I'm going to put this hop in. I'm going to pull this malt out. I'm going to swap it for this. I'm going to throw in a little bit of that. Yeah, I like recipes as very loose guidelines.
Yeah.
I guess. So that's kind of how my brewing style is as well. I just kind of play with things and if it works, cool. I've got a record of what I used, and if it doesn't work, cool. I'll never use that again.
So when you're looking at the recipe, then how, like, what is your inspiration then of, like, all right, I'm gonna change this out or I'm gonna add this adjunct? Like, how do you get to that point of, like, this is what I want to change?
I typically look at a style of beer that I like, and I'm like, well, how would I change this to make it something I like even more? Blonde ales, like the one I was talking about earlier. I love blonde ales in the summertime because they're nice, light, easy drinker, sitting out on the patio, sitting by the pool, whatever. You can have a few. They're low ABV, so you don't feel guilty about drinking 3, 4, a dozen. um, but as nice as they are, for as light as they are, they're also kind of boring in the flavor profile. I mean, they're about as close to a macro style beer as you can get, and not actually be a macro style beer. And that's not to say it's a bad thing. I mean, sometimes that's definitely what you want. But
Hmm.
I wanted to have just a little bit more in mind. I wanted to have just a little bit more of that caramel flavor, and I wanted to have just a little bit more of a crisp biscuit flavor in mind. So I'm like, okay, well, what can I do to this recipe to make it more how I would want it? I'm like, well, I can pull out some of the pale malt that is the base for this, the Pilsner malt, and then I can just throw in just a touch of another malt, like what was it? It's caramel 40, I think is what I
Mm.
used. Hang on. Yeah, caramel. I had to bring up my recipe. Yeah, so yeah, I use a crystal slash caramel 40, um, and then a little just a little bit of Carapils,
Mm.
just to switch up because typically a blonde ale just has Pilsner malt in it, and as nice as that is, it's kind of plain.
I mean, they're essentially the ale version of a lager, like a macro
Correct.
lager, and that's not a insult to them because I mean the thing I love about blonde ales is, and way more than if, because lager yeast to me has like offers a very distinct taste. That's partly why people like lagers, but blonde ales stand up to so much recipe abuse. Like if you want to try out like a brand new flavor in a beer, you generally can't go too wrong by doing it to a blonde ale.
Yeah, well, and they're a fantastic beer for people who just want to play around a little bit but don't
Hmm.
want to get too crazy.
Yeah.
because it is like you said, it's basically the ale equivalent of a lager, and it's a pretty clean palate to start from. So
Hmm.
you can try and add things to it and see what works and what doesn't. And worst case scenario, if you're making a small batch, like say a 5 gallon batch or whatever, okay, you're out what, $15 worth of ingredients
Twenty
because
bucks at
there's
the most. Yeah.
yeah, because there's not a whole lot in it to start with. So if you're adding just a little bit and replacing something, just a little bit of this and a little bit of that,
Hmm.
you're not really changing the price point at all. So it's a great beer to start with experimenting
Yeah.
because you're not going to lose a whole lot, even if it's a completely terrible beer that you create.
Yeah, and it's also a great style to learn almost advanced brewing techniques with because there's nowhere for off flavors to hide. When you're doing your
That is true.
Yeah, when you're doing your big hot bomb IPAs, which are totally my jam, like I've done a couple where it's like I know it's there, but my mate Aaron isn't gonna know it's there. But if you did it to like a blonde ale, and if Aaron ever hears this, he's gonna yell at me. But if you're doing it to a blonde ale, like there is nowhere for it to hide.
Well, yeah, I mean that's the same with pretty much any of the simple styles. I mean, they're simple styles, but they're also the most brutal when it comes to pointing out flaws in your recipe or
Hmm.
things like that. So yeah, I mean, if you can make a good blonde ale, cool, make a fantastic blonde ale. But if you also want a beer that you can play around with and not feel guilty when it comes out bad, start with a blonde
Do a
ale.
blonde ale. So, what other beer styles then have you experimented with?
Well, my go-to beer that I typically brew the most is actually it's a stout. So I have a base stout called War Never Changes
Hmm.
from the Fallout series. Most of my beers are named after pop references, so it'll be games or movies or books. So War Never Changes is the base stout that I have, and the base stout comes in at about I think it comes in at like 5.5%. But I use that as my jumping off point. So that, I also use it to make an imperial version of that stout that comes in at like 10.5%, and I use it to make. I've made a toasted marshmallow chocolate stout using that as the
Ooh.
base, and I've made a sour stout with that as the base. So I take this one recipe and I change it up or I add things to it, and it becomes my go-to. So the name War Never Changes is kind of an oxymoron because that recipe changes all the time depending on what I'm doing to it. I did one with is it Kavik? Is that how you pronounce it?
I've heard it so many ways, like Greek,
Yeah,
Vrijk. Yeah.
right. Yeah, well, whatever that the Scandinavian yeast
The
that
one that can be fermented at 100 Fahrenheit.
right. So I took and I called it War in Norway. Was what I called that version of it. So I took this, say, just my basic imperial stout recipe using this blend called Jordal, which is from Escarpment Labs here in Ontario, which they make fantastic yeast, and it literally fermented in 3 days, and I was at 10.5%.
Oh,
Three
wow.
days.
3 days. That's
It,
crazy.
it's amazing. I pitched the yeast. 15 minutes later, the overflow tube into my bubbler was going nuts,
Hmm.
and then literally, I swear to you, it was 72 hours on the dot, and it just stopped dead.
That's crazy.
I mean, it's like it's going nuts, and then you turn around and it's just nothing.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I guess it's done.
Because I used one for a Sati I was making, which is an old Scandinavian style of beer, and I was doing it dead in the summer, and I couldn't get. So I live in Colorado, and I couldn't get the wort down to pitching temperature for another yeast. But when I got down to 100 for that one, I was like, I'm good now. Because I hate the chilling process. It takes forever. And yeah, exactly the same thing. Like within an hour, bubbles. Thankfully, I use a blow-off tube because that thing was active beyond belief. Helped ruin a carpet. And and yeah, it was like you said, 3 days. It was done. Like I still left it for the 2 weeks, kind of out of fear that I was gonna go to it too soon. But yeah, that yeast is crazy.
Yeah, well, the thing for me is I love my imperial stouts. I love big beers. We've talked about that. That's why you guys did this Chimay on my shows, because I love big beers, and so I wanted to play with it, and it literally cuts my time in half for my imperial stout, because it used to take it would take a week to 2 weeks for it to finish fermenting, and then I had to let it sit for at least 2 weeks. And then I would to kind of settle out and condition or whatever, and then I could do something with it. Well, if I can ferment it in 3 days, it just it cuts 11 days off my
be
time
drinking it by Friday.
That's right.
So when
you absolutely fantastic.
So when you're approaching brewing a blonde and approaching brewing like a big beer, does that impact how you're brewing it, how you're your process, or how you're formulating that recipe, or do you stick with the same process every time?
No, I pretty much use the same process every time when I create a recipe. If I'm doing one that I've done before, I mean, it's literally just plug and play. I just grab the ingredients that I need.
Yeah.
If I'm creating a new one, I use Beersmith. It's a pretty well known program for crafting beer. Yeah. And that really helps, because it'll show you, as you're building a recipe, it'll show you if you're within tolerances for the style. And for the most part, you want to try and stay within some sort of close tolerance to the style, if you want to call it that style. I like to push the boundaries. I'll take the especially when it comes to like the color and the ABV. I'll try and push those as far up into the past the green into like the yellow without getting into the red zone as I can. But yeah, it's the same approach pretty much every time. I'll take the base, like I said, the base recipe that you get from the style guides, and then I'll start tweaking it till I find what I want.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, what I'll do is if I'm doing, so say I'm doing a 20-gallon batch, is going to be my main batch. I'll actually buy enough to do a 25-gallon, and I'll do a pilot with a 5-gallon batch, just to make sure that I'm not fucking things up when I when I dump in the big batch. You know? And yeah, it's worked out for me pretty well. But like I said, I like to play things fast and loose. So if it's a little different than I expected, but it's still pretty much in the same realm, I'm happy.
Yeah. So you're brewing 20-gallon batches? I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So well, yeah. So I used to do 5-gallon batches, and I had a system called a brewy, so it was an automated system. So I would literally just set it and forget it, kind of like the Ron Popeil rotisserie of beer makers. And that wasn't enough. So then I got a second one. So then I was doing double batches, and then I started doing doubles on the doubles. And yeah, so I've got a decent home brew set up. I'm actually getting a new brewing system next month. I'm placing the order for. I'm getting myself a Blickman 1-barrel Herms.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I'm going pro in my garage.
In your garage, yeah. I am jealous.
Yeah. So and then I'm also buying two half-barrel unit tanks to supplement the two quarter-barrel Chronicles that I have out there. So I've got the half quarter-barrel conical fermenters with glycol chiller and
oh wow
everything out there, right? Yeah. I figured if I was going to do it, I was going to do it the way I wanted to really do it.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, I mean, I'm also the guy that has the 10-foot long commercial cooler with 4 doors and 3 taps on it in my garage as well. So right now I've got a 30-liter keg of Bob's Best Bitter from Grain and Grit here locally, and then a 20-liter keg of Equilibrium, which is another ESB from Nickelbrook Brewing in Burlington, Ontario. So
Be
and I've
on.
got one tap free right now.
Very nice. I was gonna say, be honest. Are you the most popular guy in your neighborhood?
I probably would be if people were allowed to go to other people's
Oh,
houses
that's
right now.
true. Yeah. Are you the drunkest guy in your neighborhood right now?
That probably, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I did. You know, what's funny is I did dry January because I realized I was drinking way more than I really needed to. So I figured my body needed a reset. I mean, I was at the point where I was drinking 6 beers a day, and most of them were at least 10%.
Oof.
Yeah, and it's funny. So I did the dry January thing, and I had 2 beers on February 1st. Both of them were under 6%ers, and I was feeling mighty fine after 2 beers. After 30 days of not having any alcohol in your system, you're drinking. You're like, oh yeah, I remember what it's like when you're not abusing your body on a daily basis with this stuff.
Oh, this feels nice. As we sit here in the pub of the mind, what beer are you going to be adding to our tap list?
Right, so I'm going to be adding my take on a blonde ale. It's a Canadian Dirty Blonde. It's a nice beer. I have brewed this myself at least a dozen times, and as I told you before the show started, I did a collaborative brew with a real brewery, Schooner Street Brewing in Waterloo, and they actually asked me if I would brew this with them for a holiday party for another company that the owner of the brewery owns. So we did we did a nice batch of it for a holiday party, and I wasn't at this holiday party because I had other plans. But apparently they made a 15-gallon batch of it just to see if people would like it, and it was gone in a half an hour.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's a decent beer. In terms of color, it's kind of a light amber color. It's not the really light straw color, just typical blonde ales, because I do use the caramel 40.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, you know, depending on if you crash it hard or not, it'll be slightly hazy. It's got a medium light carbonation visually, so you'll see a few little bubbles rising in it, but nothing crazy. It gets a decent head on it, and it's got, like I said, it's got that base blonde ale flavor, which is kind of like a cracker, white bread crackery flavor. But because I use the Carapils and the caramel 40 in it, you also get a little bit of like baked bread crust and actual like biscuit flavor to it, which is nice.
Yeah.
It's not as biscuity as, say, like your English mild that you've got, but it's got that, you know, you taste it and you get the aftertaste, you're like, oh yeah, that tastes like a biscuit. It's nice.
Yeah, I'm such a fan of biscuity beers. Like, I brewed twice one weekend in January, and both of them were like biscuit forward beers. So I was like, I'm such a fan of that. I love that. As much as I love hot bombs, I just love that malty backbone to get my teeth into.
Yeah, that's my favorite style, is pretty much anything that's got a malty backbone to it. So, you know, I love my stouts, I love my porters, I love my ESBs and my bitters. I love an old school IPA. None of this hop bomb New England West Coast bullshit. Give me an old school English IPA where it's got that, you know, that super heavy maltiness with that that kick of bitter at the end, and you're like, oh yeah, this is what a beer is supposed to be.
You are the third person to come on and organically slam New England IPAs.
Well, you know, New England IPAs are the IPAs for people who don't like IPAs.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's just like you see these places that have like sour IPA. That's not an IPA.
No, that's an IPA.
It's just a sour.
Yeah.
You know, a New England IPA isn't really an IPA, in my opinion. It's just a fruity beer that has some of the same hops as an IPA.
I would agree with that. With so you being in Canada, coming from the US, one of the things I struggle to find are those ESBs, or if they do have an ESB, like and I'm not gonna name and shame, but like there's only one place here I found where the ESB is 100% solid, and that's because the brewmaster happens to be from Old Blighty.
Nice.
Yeah, he's a fantastic brewer. Um, are milds and ESBs more common up in Canada as we share the same head of state?
They are actually. So the two I have on tap, like I said, I have Bob's Best Bitter. Actually, I think they renamed it. It's like Bob's Best English Ale now because a lot of people don't understand that a bitter
Isn't
isn't
bitter.
necessarily bitter. And then the other one I have on tap, Equilibrium. Those are both fantastic ESBs. And then there's another brewery that I like to frequent called Clifford Brewing. They make one called the Dark Streets of London, which is an absolutely phenomenal ESB, and they also do a cask version of it that you can buy. They cask age it, and then they put it into like the boxes like you can get the cheap wine in,
Yeah.
but you can
Oh,
buy
that's clever.
a 4 liter box of it when they do it, and it's absolutely fantastic because you get that nice low carbonation because it's cask aged,
Yes.
so you can slam 4 liters before you realize it. But it's cask aged beers are just so much smoother and so much more palatable than because carbonation adds bitterness to beer,
Yes.
and if you're looking for something that's more sweet and caramelly and biscuity, you don't necessarily want that bitter. I mean, you might want a little bitter on the end, but you're looking if you're going for those kind of beers, you're going for sweet anyway. So might as well have a lower carbonation so there's less bitterness to it.
Well, because the thing I spend a lot of time fighting here is obviously people say like, "Oh, British beer is warm and flat," and it's like, no, it's cellar temperature, not ice cold, and it's not flat. And the only thing I can kind of explain it without getting into technical of live fermentation and all of that fun stuff is America loves their beer carbonated like soda. And
Yes.
again, not an insult, but if you take an American IPA versus a British IPA, the bubble difference is yeah.
All right. I have switched beers because my first beer was just a little shorty can, so
Ooh,
now I'm on to my second beer.
nice.
So I am drinking Hockley Dark from Hockley Valley Brewing. It is a traditional English ale, so it's mild, light body with full flavor, and I have to say it is a nice beer. This is one that I had never heard of before I moved to Canada because obviously it's a smaller craft brew here in Canada. They make fantastic beer. Their dark ale is, I mean, you can see no one else will.
No.
It's a nice dark.
Yeah, that's gorgeous.
It's a nice, yeah. It's like this ruddy auburn color, and it's fantastic. It's bready, it's biscuity. It's got just a twinge of bitter on the end. I mean, it's everything you want an English ale to be.
Nice. So we'll be adding the recipe to the Canadian Dirty Blonde to the show notes. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, so everyone can brew and drink along as they listen to the podcast. But I would love to know, what is the beer that you brewed and went, I've made a huge mistake?
It actually happened right around Christmas time this year.
Oh no.
Yeah, my buddy Dale came from Nova Scotia, and he's like, "Hey, let's brew something together." I'm like, "Cool," and my brew system was down, so he brought his with him. He had one of those Robo brews, they're all in one.
Yep.
He's like, I'm driving out that way, so I'll just bring it with, and we'll brew a beer. I'm like, cool. So I put together a recipe for an American strong ale, which is a fantastic style of beer.
Yep.
Unfortunately, my grain bill was a little too heavy for his Robo brew to handle properly. And during the mashing process, he got a nice error on the screen telling him that it had a thermal overload and it shut off.
Oh no! And the resets on the bottom, which is such a pain in the ass.
Yeah. So we yeah. Oh well, and on top of that, there had been some particulate fall through his false bottom,
Yeah.
and it burned on the bottom. So the entire thing had a burnt flavor to it.
No.
Yeah, so we pulled it out of the Robo Brew and we threw it onto. I happen to have a 150,000 BTU propane burner and a
Beautiful.
16-gallon vessel, so we tossed it into that. brought it up to mash temperature, then brought it to a boil, did everything. But yeah, I threw it, and I saw the burnt stuff on the bottom, and I'm like, this is gonna be a dud. I'm pretty sure of it. But we'll throw it in the keg and we'll let it sit. And I let it, we went through the fermentation process, and that all went fine. And I tested it, and it still tasted a little burnt when I was testing it and everything. And I threw it into the keg and let it sit for 3 months.
Wow.
Well, not I guess not at 3 months, 2 months, because I just threw it out last week. And I kept testing it along the way, and yeah, it was absolutely horrible. I called it what did I call it? I called it scorch beer.
I was gonna say you could just tell everyone it was a Rausch beer, and everyone would be like, "Oh yeah, that's really fashionable right now."
Right? Yeah. No, it was beyond a rock beer, and it was into scorch beer. It was absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate too, because the recipe it was a damn fine recipe, but just due to circumstance, it turned out like crap. One of my other ones that I've brewed a few times, and it's been really hit or miss for me, is do a maple cranberry gruit.
Ooh.
If you're not
what's
familiar,
a gruit? Yeah.
Yeah, for people who aren't familiar, a gruit is a beer that gets bittered without using hops. So it uses botanicals and spices to bitter it rather than using hops. So typically for the gruit that I make, I use like mulling spices, like if you're making mulled wine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So and it's been, it's one of those beers that it's an ancient style of beer, and it's much like your pilsners and things. There's no room to hide your mistakes. If it's good, it's good, and if it's bad, it's really bad. So I've brewed it. I think I've brewed it 5 times, and 3 of the 5 have been either or bad, and 2 of the times have been like, wow, this is the best thing I've ever brewed.
What would you say the difference was, with like getting the 2 good batches to the 3 bad?
Honestly, I think it's the ingredients that you can get when you're making it. I mean, you have to use it uses like 2 pounds of fresh cranberries, and if you can't get fresh cranberries, you have to try and substitute the frozen ones. And while they're almost as good, they're not quite as good. And if you can't get those, then you got to try and get dried ones, which don't use dried ones because they destroy the recipe. And it uses it uses ginger in it as well. So if your ginger's a little suspect, your beer is going to have a weirdness to it because and you can't use like powdered ginger or candied ginger. It has to be fresh, ground ginger. So things like that. And again, your spices. If your spices are starting to get old and they're not really flavorful, or they're not gonna do their bittering job, I think that's what it comes down to. And dried spices are the hardest thing to judge when they're still dry. So that I think that's really what makes it hit or miss. Is okay, well, I've got my mulling spices here. How fresh were these when I bought them?
Yeah.
How fresh are they now? How much?
Well, because spices and herbs are just things that you just have in your kitchen cabinet and never think about.
Right. My wife is an avid gastronomist, I guess. She likes to cook, and she likes to play around. So we typically have a fairly robust amount of spices in the house, and they tend to rotate in and out pretty quickly. But again, if you're not getting it from a source that reliably gives you properly aged and properly conditioned dried spices, you don't know what you're really getting.
Yeah.
I mean, and we tend to buy things from a very reputable dealer based out of Edmonton, Ontario, called Silk Road Spices, and they have fantastic stuff. But sometimes, you can't get the stuff you want right away, so you got to try and substitute with stuff you can find locally, and that's hit or miss.
Yeah, I can't say I'm ever going to try a gruit. That just sounds horrifying.
I mean, when it works great. I mean, you can probably find a less complex gruit recipe that would probably be a lot easier to use. Something that doesn't use the all the moving parts that mine does. I mean, I tend to be kind of aggressive when it comes to the number of ingredients I put into beers. Like I have a Belgian double that typically a Belgian double will use 4 types of malt.
Mm-hmm.
Mine uses 7. Just because I can.
I was gonna say that's the American spirit right there.
That's right. That's me. Push those damn boundaries.
So as we sit here again in the homebrew pub of the mind, this brew pub turns into whatever you want it to be. So, what would your brew pub be called, and what would your brew pub be?
Right. So, I think I talked to you about this before we were recording. When I moved to Canada, the intent was that my wife and I were actually going to open a brew pub until we discovered how much rigmarole and red tape and hoops you have to jump through here in Ontario to open a brew pub. But our brew pub was actually going to be called Critical Hit Brewing. And it was going to be geeky game inspired. So our logo was actually Cthulhu. For those who know who Cthulhu is, you know what he looks like. For those who don't, imagine a giant muscular man with a squid's head and big claws and green wings. And he was throwing a 20-sided die, and it came up on a 20. So that was our logo. It was critical hit. And the interior was going to basically going to look like every comic book shop you've ever been in. So it was going to be full of shelves with games and books and comics and graphic novels for people to sit around and read. And then the brewing equipment and the taps and everything all in the back, where you could come up, grab what you want, hang out, have a beer or 3, fill my pocketbooks because I'm losing money on this every day.
That sounds like a slice of heaven for me.
Yeah, because that's what my wife and I like. I mean, we're geeks. We play video games. We've got 3 bookshelves full of board games, and then we've got probably, I don't know, between the two of us, we've probably got 4,000 or 5,000 books.
Oh wow, gee.
Yeah. We're avid book collectors. We might not read them all before we die, but we want to own them. So like a lot of our beers are inspired by the books and movies and things like that. So, like I said, my stout was called War Never Changes for the base, and then I had a sour ginger ale that I made, as opposed to ginger ale that you buy in the store. This is a sour ginger ale. that I called Nuka Ginger from the Fallout series. And then I've got I actually have a hard sarsaparilla that I make as opposed to a hard root beer, because sarsaparilla is the original. So that's actually called Sunset Sarsaparilla, and from Fallout. I've got Stay Puffed, which is my toasted marshmallow stout.
Nice.
From Ghostbusters. Yeah. I've got what have I got? My Belgian double is called Pippin and Mary from Lord of the Rings. And then I've got Saruman the Sour. And then what else have I got? I don't know. I've got. Well, here, hang on. Let me look at my list of recipes.
We made a vanilla cream ale for Ghostbusters.
Nice.
In honor of Stay Puft, and we served it on Nitro.
So my Lord of the Rings beers are Beer and Back Again, a Hobbit's ale. Gimli at Helm's Deep, which is an Imperial Porter. Pippin and Mary, which is my double. Bilbo's Best Bitter, which is my best bitter. What else have I got? I've got Hesture, my Imperial barley wine. So you take a barley wine and you amp it up even more. So instead of being like 11%, it's more like 13 or 14%. And if you can, you barrel age it.
Yep.
And then I've got my bourbon barrel aged porter called Miskatonic Reserve. And then what else have I got? Goza the Gozerian, which is my Goza. Go figure. Yeah. And then for people who might know, I'm part of a community of runners that play a game called Zombies Run. So it's an immersive running game where you take the part of the main character called Runner 5. So I've got several recipes based off of that. Like our saison is called Janine's Farmhouse because in the story you live at Janine's farmhouse. And I've got the Pepe's Original Tequila Aged Ale, and
Nice.
then I've got the Runner 5's Lemon Ginger Radler.
Ooh,
Yeah,
that sounds delightful.
yeah. I mean, those are some of my recipes, and then I've got one like I've got a Flanders Red called Stupid Flanders. Based off the Simpsons. So, and then my gruit is typical, technically named Hi. My name is Herb because it's bittered with herbs.
Yeah. That all sounds amazing. So everyone, come and join us at Critical Hit for some nerdy goodness. And while we're constantly adding to the Homebrew Pub tap list, Rob here's got an amazing tap list of his own. So go and get some of those beers.
That's right. Yeah, and please, feel free to take the recipe that'll be in the notes for the Canadian Blonde Ale and put your own twist on it. I would love to see what other people do with it. It's great as is, but I bet someone else could make it 100% better.
I was gonna say absolutely, but that sounded really rude, and but no, I mean, but that's the beautiful thing about homebrewing is you take recipes and you take inspiration and you can just make it your own, and that's not to say it's better or worse than what came before or after. It's just what you want to drink, and that's a beautiful thing.
That's right. Yeah. So come on down to Critical Hit Brewing. We're serving up other people's beer at the moment, but as soon as this pandemic's over, we're going to be brewing full bore, and the taps will be flowing.
Again, a huge thank you to Rob. Please go and check out his web series, Rob from the Internet Talks Beer, and I'll be putting his details in the show notes along with the beer recipe, so you can reach out to him, and if you want to go on his show, it is a great time. And of course, thank you so much for listening. If you could leave us a 5-star review wherever it is you get your podcast, that'll just help other people find the show. If you want to reach out to us, possibly come on and share a pint with me, you can reach us at our website, thehomebrewpub.com, or email landlord@thehomebrewpub.com, or on social, @thehomebrewpub on Instagram and Twitter. And if, like me, you hate those annoying ads, well, we've got to keep the lights on here at the Homebrew Pub somehow, so consider joining our Patreon and becoming a Mug Club member. For $3 a month, you'll get access to ad-free versions of the episodes. But until then, grab your favorite pint, put your feet up, relax, don't worry, and have a homebrew. Till next time, cheers.